Today we're going to make a trip to beautiful Switzerland. I wish I could have been there in person, but I had to settle for a phone interview with a wonderful young man named Tom Vesely. Tom has been diabetic since the age of 3. His glucose was just all over the map for years and years. But once he began to use a continuous glucose monitor, things turned around for him in a big way. Well, folks, we're going to hear from a man by the name of Tom Vesely who has been a diabetic since the age of 3. And you can probably figure out that he is a type 1 diabetic. He's got a lot of powerful things to share. And so we're going to get right into it. Tom, welcome to Beat Diabetes.
Thank you, Dennis. Thanks for the warm welcome. I'm so happy to be here. I'm a big fan of your channel, so it's an honor for me to be here, and I'm so much looking forward to talking to you and sharing some tips and hopefully also learning something from you.
Well, Tom, you have quite a geographical history. You were born in what was called Czechoslovakia, and then you moved to the U.S. and spent some time as an adult here in the U.S. Working. And now you're in the beautiful nation of Switzerland. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. I was born in Czechoslovakia and I was diagnosed, as you said, when I was 3 years old. Back then it was a communist country, so for the people who've had diabetes for over 30 years like me, you can imagine that the technology was not quite what it is today. And during the communist era, we really didn't even have a glucometer. My parents had to check my blood sugar by bringing my blood to a laboratory, doing a daily profile, what we call it back then, collecting the blood all day and then finding out the day after what my blood sugars have been throughout the day before. So that changed, of course, and I actually lived in the Czech Republic for a long time, and I started my professional career there. And as part of my professional career as a finance guy, as an auditor, I spent beautiful 5 years in the U.S. working in the Tampa Bay area and also in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I really have a quite rich geographical background, as you said. Now I live in Switzerland. My wife is Swiss. And so I found a new home in Switzerland where I live right now.
Well, I'm a bit envious. I think if I couldn't live in the U.S., I would go to what I consider about the most beautiful nation in the world, and that is Switzerland. So I envy you there. But let's talk about your diabetic situation. You know, when you shared with me that for several years after you were found to be type 1, just as a little child, your parents didn't even have a glucometer at all. It's a wonder you lived through that, but they managed to get you through that and finally did get a glucometer. What was life like growing up as a type 1? Obviously, a lot of things you had to go through that others don't.
Yeah, that's true. I had to take insulin every day and check my blood sugar. I was on a four times a day insulin doses, fast acting and long acting insulin. And as I said before, I think we switched to insulin pump when I was 12. And I was quite active. I was playing basketball on quite a decent level, and also spending a lot of time with my friends. And so you can imagine my blood sugars were all over the place in that time, just because of so many things I have been trying to do, and I didn't really focus exactly on the blood sugar management. Because I wanted to do all these things, I didn't want to go to hypo all the time, and what I did back then, which I'm not very proud of, I was intentionally running with a little bit higher blood sugars, just to avoid going hypo and being able to do things without going too low, which I was a little bit afraid of. And so it was challenging. I think especially for my parents was very challenging, and I really had some issues with very high blood sugar when I was around the age of 17, and I actually peed myself a couple times at night because my blood sugar were so high. And I think that was the point in time where I told to myself that this has to stop, and I have to really focus on my health a little bit more than all the other activities.
Yeah, let's talk about the insulin pump. You know, there's a couple of things about the type 1 that would make a person think it ought to be easy to control your glucose levels if you didn't know any better. I mean, I'm not saying it is. I know it isn't. But you might think that, and for a couple of reasons. Number one, since you give yourself insulin, you might suppose that you just measure how much you're going to eat. With the fast-acting insulin, you give yourself the appropriate amount. Everything is cool. But even with the insulin pump, the idea of an insulin pump is supposed to be that it's going to sense your need for insulin, and it's going to release the insulin that is necessary to keep your glucose levels at the proper range. And yet, with your insulin pump, your glucose levels weren't at all close to the proper range. Why doesn't the insulin pump work a little better than that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question, actually. The older models of insulin pumps, you can program, so you could tell the pump what you want your basal rate to be, how many units of insulin per hour you want the pump to pump to your body, and you could, on top of that, take what we call bolus, which is extra insulin before one eats carbs to cover those carbohydrates and not spike too much. But the pump doesn't do the calculations itself. So I had to always calculate and tell the pump what dosage I want as the basal, as the long-term insulin, and also as the bolus when I ate. And so for a type 1 who really at that time was told to eat a quite high carb diet. Basically, I had prescribed the amount of carbs that I should eat for every meal, and these carbs obviously were spiking my blood sugar, and I had to do quite a bit of guesstimation how many units of insulin I need to cover those carbs. So having a pump makes it flexible because you have it on you all the time. You can take extra insulin at any time you want. But at that time, the pump was not so intelligent that it would be giving you the insulin depending on what your blood sugar is. So it was not anyhow connected to your glucometer or something like that. I think that the fact that I was eating quite high carb made it extremely difficult for me to manage the blood sugars, and the pump itself doesn't really solve the problem. I think the diet might be even more important, and we probably get to it, and a more important recipe for good blood sugars than the pump itself, because one can have very good blood sugars when eating well and paying attention, even with insulin pen when one is type 1 diabetic. So the pump makes it easier, a little bit more flexible, but it's not a magic solution, I would say.
Yeah, well, obviously it wasn't in your case. You mentioned you were running in the 8s and 9s for an A1C, and in your teens you even went up to around 13 for a time, so that is not at all good. Let's talk about your diet. You know, when a doctor tells you have diabetes, it's his responsibility or her responsibility to try to suggest a diet, or at least turn you over to a nutritionist who will suggest a diet. What kind of advice were you given about your diet?
So when I was a teenager, I think the general approach and all the doctors I met during my life pretty much were telling me I always need to count carbs, and depending how many carbs I eat, that much insulin I should take. But the approach was always here is 60 grams of carbs. This is how much you should eat for lunch. And for this 60 grams of carbs, you should take 5 units of the bolus of the insulin before the meal. But the advice was always, you should eat certain amount of carbs a day, which is quite high. It's quite a bit more than what I eat today, and take that insulin. So I was taking quite a lot of insulin and eating quite a lot of carbs. I would say you could call it a high carb diet, almost what I was told to do as a teenager and also as an adult.
Yeah, and I think that is par for the course. It certainly has been for many years. It may be changing slowly now. So they basically said, count your carbs, but you don't need to limit your carbs. Just make sure your insulin matches. And yet with that advice, as with so many that we hear who take insulin, you are having all kinds of hypos. Talk to us about the hypos. Have you had a lot of those during those days? And describe exactly what you feel and what's going on with a hypo.
So yeah, I had a decent amount, I would say, and hypos are very annoying because when one has hypo, and as a young person, you probably feel every hypo. You realize that you have a hypo because in my case, I started shaking, I started sweating, I was very hungry, and that's how I knew I was going hypo. And the natural reaction of the body or the instinct is you want to eat to get rid of the hypo very, very quickly, because it's dangerous to go too low. You can lose consciousness, and it can be quite dangerous. What I think a lot of type 1 diabetics and also insulin-dependent type 2 diabetics might do is overeat when one has hypo, because we want to get rid of this nasty feeling as fast as possible, and so we eat a lot, and then the insulin, the blood sugar goes up again, and it goes up and down, and it becomes a little bit of a roller coaster. So what I learned is one should try to really eliminate any of those drops and spikes. And when one eats a high carb diet, it's a lot of time it's a guessing game, and you just go up from the food, you go down from the insulin, and it's very hard to find the balance, and that's why sometimes I went to a hypo.
So you had basically some very high A1Cs. Your blood sugar was running much higher than is safe and healthy throughout your youth, throughout your teen years. It even got worse. We'll talk about that in a minute. But let me ask, did you have the complications of various physical symptoms, neuropathy, anything like that was that you had to live with, or were you pretty much symptom-free during those days?
During those days, I was symptom-free. I didn't have neuropathy or retinopathy. I still don't. I have to knock on wood, because living with those high blood sugars, as you said, it's really dangerous, and one could easily have these symptoms. So I didn't. What I had was more of these symptoms that I mentioned, that when I was high, it was hard for me to actually sleep without releasing the urine, and that was the biggest problem. I think that was the main trigger for me to focus more on reducing the blood sugar. So I didn't have any of the symptoms you mentioned, so in a sense, I was lucky.
Yeah, that was a great blessing. So you mentioned that as a teenager, that's the time when a diabetic begins to take some control, especially in the later teens, of their diet, their program to deal with diabetes. And you just actually took less control. You didn't work too hard at it, and your A1C got worse. You just didn't think you were going to get hurt by diabetes? What was going on in your mind? Why did you let yourself go like that as a teen?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, I wish I knew. I just think I didn't really think about it. I was just I thought I was smarter than everyone else. I didn't really pay that much attention to the doctor advice. I would not recommend anyone to do that. If I was talking to a close friend, I would just say I was stupid. Now I look at things differently. But when I was teenager, I just didn't. Don't know what to say. I'm a bit ashamed of that, but I cannot change it anymore.
Well, right, and no need to be ashamed. It is what it is, and I don't think there's any of us alive that didn't do some stupid things as teens. So join the club on that, whether it has to do with diabetes or anything else. But at some point, things change. I mean, here you are now. You have a YouTube channel where you're speaking to thousands of diabetics yourself. It's, I believe, called Type 1 Talks. And you talk a lot about the continuous glucose monitors, but obviously you made a right hand or a U-turn at some point, and things really began to change. What was it that really got your attention and motivated you to change and become much more careful with your lifestyle?
I would say there were two things that really made me change my attitude. One was when I started having relationships with the other gender, and I really felt like I need to be responsible. I need to be there for the other half, and a long life and being healthy goes hand in hand with that, because you cannot support someone when you have serious health issues, and you actually need someone else to support you. So that was probably the first thing, and the second thing was I have quite I would say higher level professional career. I'm a busy man. I actually next to having the YouTube channel, I worked quite a lot for a professional accounting firm, and when I was around 30 or slightly after 30, I would say 3-4 years ago, I started feeling tired a little bit sooner than before. And I was doing a research, what's causing this, why I don't have so much energy than I had before. I'm 30, so I should still have a lot of energy. And I was doing more and more research on the internet, and I thought, maybe the reason for me being tired was that my diabetes is not so well controlled. It's my blood sugars are still up and down, not as bad as when I was a teenager, but maybe it's really that I need to be even stricter, and I really need to focus more on my blood sugar management. And I started using a CGM because I read really good reviews from people who started using CGM, which is a continuous glucose monitor for continuous monitoring of your blood glucose. And I was actually very surprised what kind of information and detailed trends I could see from the continuous glucose monitor that I was not aware with the glucometer. I really saw how carbohydrates impact my blood sugar minute by minute, because on the continuous glucose monitor you get a reading every 5 minutes, and you can see what the food is doing with your blood sugars. And that's when I actually realized what all the carbohydrates are doing with my blood glucose, and that's when I actually started to reducing the eating the carbohydrates and going low carb for most of the time, and that was a huge help for me. I felt after some time that I really the feeling of being tired is most of the time resulting from the blood sugar spiking or dropping very fast. And when I was able to reduce these events of blood sugar spiking or dropping very fast, I was actually feeling much better. So, and for me, this was an impulse to work even harder, to focus on the diet, and reducing carbs. And when eating carbs, taking my insulin earlier, because when you take insulin earlier before you eat carbs, 15-20 minutes, we call it pre-bolus, that actually helps reduce the spike of the insulin caused by of the blood sugar caused by the carbohydrates that you eat. So by combining low carb diet and pre-bolusing, I was able to get my blood sugars really under control. My HbA1c is now in the 6% range, which is a huge improvement to what I had before. I still want to work on it, but I know I improved quite a bit, and that motivated me to start my YouTube channel and share what I learned with others, that's now my biggest motivation, because I see people are watching my videos, subscribing to my channel, and I feel committed now to work harder than ever on managing my diabetes and blood sugar.
Well, that is awesome, Tom, and it strikes me that you and I are pretty similar. I'm sure there are ways in which we're very different, but you found by testing your blood sugar a lot through the CGM that there was a definite relationship between carbohydrates and blood sugar rising and spiking. I found it through Mike the meter. I guess we'll call it the CGM Charlie, the meter, since C is the first letter of the CGM. So you found it through Charlie, I found it through Mike, but we both came to the same conclusion, that is that carbohydrates spike blood sugar. And I mean, it's true. Anybody with either a Charlie or a Mike, any kind of a meter is going to find that out, and it motivated you. There's a saying that knowledge is power. And I think I could add to that, knowledge is motivation. You got motivated once you saw what was happening with your glucose, didn't you?
Yes, exactly. And, by being able to see the trends, which you can see on Charlie, a CGM Charlie, that you don't see on the glucometer, I think you get a little bit more insights. And as a type 1 diabetic, who is more sensitive to those up and downs, because we're injecting insulin to our body, I think being able to see those trends and not only knowing what my absolute value is of the blood sugar, is my blood sugar 100 or 120, on the continuous glucose monitor, I also see, is it going up or is it going down, or is it being stable? So I get a little bit more information than the point in time. I see the trend. I see, how the blood sugar has been moving sometime before I took the reading, and some of the CGMs can even predict how your blood sugar will be trending to the future. And I think the trend most of the time for me was even more important indicator than the absolute value, because I knew, will I be possibly low in 30 minutes, or will I be possibly a little bit higher? And this information is really the most valuable, and so totally agree. The knowledge is power in that respect.
So why do I stress the importance of blood sugar meters on this channel? Because they were the key to the light coming on in my own life as to what was happening with my body. And they showed me how carbohydrates were driving my glucose levels totally out of control. And that is exactly what happened with Tom as he started measuring his glucose levels with a CGM. So my advice to you, if you're struggling with runaway blood sugar, is get out of the dark. Find out what's happening with your own body. And as you discover this, you'll get not only information, but motivation will arise out of nowhere. I want to remind you that I put together a series of videos especially for newly diagnosed diabetics, which I call the Diabetes Emergency Kit. These are a series of videos you can download and watch them and even show them to your church group or neighborhood club or just some diabetic friend that you care about. A link to get these videos is in the description. Okay, that's it for now. God bless. I'll see you again soon.